In just a few moments, I'm going to try to destroy two misconceptions that practically every educated person holds about language. One, that we pronounce letters, that letters have sounds. And two, that English has 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y and W. I'm going to show you that we don't pronounce letters, that letters don't have sounds, and that English has 36 vowels and possible vowel combinations. In our last program, we showed you that language was more than words, that it was the patterns of language that allowed words to do their work for us, and that language was uniquely human, that only man could talk, that these marvelous patterns and the words within their patterns, that actually these particular words seemed to shape the impressions that we got about the world, and also that language itself was encased in a package of other systems that we call paralanguage and kinesics. Now today, what I want to do is to start off by giving you a definition of language. All of us remember the kinds of definitions we used to get out of the books we had in school. You know, it went something like this. Language is a means or a vehicle for communicating thoughts and ideas. Now, such a statement as this is really not a definition of anything. Actually, what it looks like, I suppose, is something like this, that the words of language were a set of little vehicles of different shapes and sizes, and that somehow or other pure meaning got poured into these little vehicles, the words, that we sent them along a car track like this, and the fellow on the receiving end sort of reached in to the little business and put it on his head, and somehow or other that way got the message. No, this particular thing is not a definition. It is a description of one of the most important functions of language. But it doesn't define anything because, as we remember, the structure of that vehicle itself may be one of the principal shapers of what we call thoughts and ideas. So in starting off our definition, I want to start it off this way. Language is a system. And that particular term, system, will be the most important term in our definition. It actually sums up all of the amazing patternings, the patterns on patterns on patterns, which every language is. In other words, this business of patterning is extremely important. We all had to learn this business of patterning, and you may remember on our first program we talked about grammatical patterns, the subject-predicate pattern, the subject-verb and complement pattern, without which we couldn't talk about the world. We also talked about intonation patterns. We found that intonation patterns could change the whole meaning of the sentence, even though the words and the grammatical patterns might be the same. For instance, what are we having for dinner, Mother? That's a polite way of asking Mother what we're having for dinner. What are we having for dinner, Mother? Here we're not being very polite to Mother, and we're not calling her a too good cook as well. And then if we said, what are we having for dinner, Mother? Well, as you can see, these particular intonation patterns can change the entire meaning of the sentence. Now, there's another level of patterns that I want to talk about this afternoon. And those are what we call distributional patterns. In every language, we find that certain words have to go together with certain other words, and can only go together with certain other words. Certain constructions only with certain other constructions. Certain kinds of sentences only with certain other kinds of sentences. This business of distribution is extremely important. For instance, we can say men are evil, but little boys aren't evil. Little boys have to be mischievous or bad. We can say he was struck by a car, but we're not stricken by a car. We may be stricken by a strange tropical ailment, but we'd only be facetiously stricken by a cold. For instance, a baby can be little, cute, clever, intelligent, and I'm afraid sometimes even blue. A shoe can be little and cute and clever and blue, but not intelligent. This business of distribution, the obligatory nature of certain distribution patterns actually works so thoroughly that we actually can predict in many cases, even if we didn't hear a certain word, again showing you how really unimportant these words are in terms of the patterns, in contrast to the patterns. We actually can predict certain words even though we haven't heard them. For instance, I don't think it would take any of us a great deal of imagination to actually predict the three words in these three sentences. Yes, this business of patterning is extremely important, and distribution patterns are extremely important. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about is the fact that language is much more than just patternings on this level. In other words, language is a patterning below the level of the words. Language is ultimately sounds. Language is made up of sounds, and these sounds pattern into the words and then the words into larger patterns. In other words, we've got now a situation of trying to find out what makes the patterns below the level. So what we're going to do now is to add to our definition something that will include this business of the sounds, because that is what language ultimately is made up of. And I'm going to add then to our definition, language is a system of vocal symbols. And I want to pause now on this term symbols. Everybody knows what a symbol is. A symbol is something that stands for something else. And man is the symbol-making and symbol-using animal par excellence. No other animal can make symbols and uses symbols the way man does. One of the important things to remember about symbols is this. Symbols are never completely and absolutely accurately represent the thing they're standing for. In other words, all symbols are incomplete and inconsistent. They don't give you an exact one-to-one correspondence with what they're standing. But people, because they use symbol systems so naturally and so well, actually forget this. And we constantly confuse the symbol for the thing it stands for, or to use the technical jargon, symbol and referent. Now, language is a system of vocal symbols. And I think that we can see how language works in terms of being a symbol system if we look at this diagram. Try to imagine now a perfect circle infinitely large. This is being represented here by this. Now, obviously, this is not infinitely large, and it's not very perfectly circular, but try to imagine a perfect circle infinitely large. This is the world of reality, the world of experience, everything that's out there, everything we know, everything we can't know because of our finite limitations, that is experience. To scale against a perfect circle infinitely large, I'm now going to symbolize language, representing it by an L, surrounded by a broken line purposely not circular. This particular broken line, purposely not circular now, is to remind us of the incompleteness and inconsistency of symbol systems. Marvelous as these languages, human languages, are, they only give us a relatively small numbers of the aspects of the world of experience. But this L then shows us that we are dealing with symbols, and this the system. Each language is a different system from each other. Language sub 2 here would be a similar kind of system, but one of different structure. Language is a symbolization of experience, incomplete and inconsistent. But now, please look at this. Way down here in right field, we have two W's. W's of different shape with nothing around them. These represent the writing systems that would go with language sub 1 and language sub 2. In other words, writing now emerges as a symbolization of language, as language is a symbolization of experience. In other words, writing is a symbolization of a symbolization. But please remember, you and I have been trained and educated to think of language as writing, and there is no more complete confusion in the world, and all literate people have it. This confusion between language and writing, as though language were the scratches you make with your fist and not the noises you make with your face. No. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Writing is an amazing invention, and we'll be talking about it later on this program. But please remember, language is not writing. This is a symbolization of experience. This is a symbolization of language. Writing is a symbolization of a symbolization, and incomplete and inconsistent, as all symbol systems are. Now, I don't think that you can get really a better understanding of how we confuse symbol with referent, writing with language in this case, than to go back to that question, or that statement I made at the beginning of the program. That is the business that you ask any educated American, how many vowels are there in English? And you'll say A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y and W. I learned that in school. We all learned that in school. But what are we saying when we say that? What we're saying is there are only 5 vowel letters we've inherited in the Latin alphabet to represent a certain number of vowel sounds. How many vowel sounds are there in the language? Well, let's just examine it for a moment. Pit, pet, pat, put, put, pot. Here are 6 distinct vowel sounds, but only again are A, E, I, O, U. In other words, here the letter U is standing for the sound in put. Here it's standing for the sound in put. Quite a different sound. It's true we do write 2 T's after the U here, and that distinguishes put from put. You know, it'd be really nice if we were consistent in this, and every time this letter U had to stand for the sound in nut or rut, that we actually put 2 T's after it. But we don't, as you know. But has only 1 T and 1 U. Because but with 2 T's, that's what a billy goat does, and that's an entirely different word. This, I think, is what the foreigner means when he says English isn't such a hard language as far as the grammar goes. It's such a hard language to pronounce. What he means is the writing system is so incomplete and inconsistent, and I, like everybody else that's literate, confuses language with writing. So he is making, again, this particular kind of error. No. Language is not writing. We do not pronounce letters. Letters do not have sounds. They only stand for the sounds of language. Well, I've given you 6 here. How many vowels are there really now in English? Are there 6 or 7 or 8? How many really are there? Well, here you will see the 9 simple vowels that there are, or short vowels that there are in the overall pattern of English. We have here the vowel in pit, pet, pat, this A and E together. Notice, because we don't have enough letters, we've had to invent some symbols to stand for these real sounds, vowel sounds in English. This one here, the I with a bar through it, stands for the sound that I say in children, for instance. Rather than children, I say children. This vowel letter here stands for the vowel sound in put and cut, the one we had there with 2 T's. This one is a vowel sound in pot, as I pronounce it, this in put. This, the way I say gonna. Notice if I'd said gonna in I'm gonna go, he's gonna go. Well, if you say gonna, it's that vowel. If you say gonna, it's that vowel. This one represents what the New Englander says when he says shot and lot, instead of shot and lot, as I say it, or what the Englishman says when he says fox and lot. In other words, we have 9 simple vowels. Simple vowel sounds in the structure of English. Up here we have a W here, a Y here, and an H. These 3 symbols stand for the semivowels. That is, these are glides away from the simple vowel position to another position in the mouth. The Y represents a glide that goes higher and fronter in the mouth, and I'll demonstrate this for you in just a moment. The W, higher and backer with more rounding, and the H represents a glide to the center. Now let me show you what I mean, because what I'm showing you now are the things we have been taught to call the long vowels and the diphthongs, except again we confuse those with letters. Now notice what happens. I'm now going to put the vowel in pit. I'm going to follow it with the higher and fronter glide represented by the Y. Watch. E, E. Do you see my tongue rising? E, and going front. Now watch. I'll go down to the vowel in pit. Follow it. A, I, as in July. As in feast and blade. In other words, I can follow every one of these with a Y. Now here's the W. Higher and backer with more rounding. Watch this. Ooh, vowel in put plus a W. Ooh. See the increased rounding? You can feel your tongue go up. O, all, and so on. Now the glide to the center. Watch how my tongue will go to the center from a vowel position. Ah. See it rise? In other words, every one of those simple vowels can be followed by each one of the semivowels to give us not just 9, but now let's look at this chart and see how many there really are. If we take the simple vowels, if we take these simple vowels and add Y and W and H to it, how many are we going to get? Well, here it is. There are simple vowels. Now, 9 plus 9 plus 9 plus 9. 36 possible syllable nuclei in English, and we still have only A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y and W to represent. If you want to see again now how inconsistent our writing system is, just watch this. As we know, let's take just the simple, or the complex nucleus. Let's take I. The sound, well, how many? Here's 1 combinations of sound. How do we write it? E-Y-E, capital I, A-I-S-L-E, I-S in I-L. If you've got money and you say either instead of either, the EI of either, and so we can see, you could pick us half a dozen more. One vowel combination, many different ways of writing, but the other way around. O-U-G-H, the same series of letters, standing now for many different sounds. Though, through, cough, enough, plow, and you could probably think of more. In other words, our writing system is extremely inconsistent, and it is incomplete. Pity the poor Spaniard, though. He only has 5 vowels, and he asks the American, please, how many vowels are there in English? And we say 5, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y and W. He says, bueno, we have only 5 in Spanish, A, E, I, O, U, but he only has 5 in Spanish. Consequently, the 5 vowel letters are much more consistent for him than they are for us. But please notice, because he has only 5, and he doesn't understand the difference between language and writing, the poor speaker of Spanish is never going to be able to straighten out the difference between the sound we make in leave, for instance, and the sound we make in live. He's always going to be living when he should be leaving and leaving when he should be living. And he'll never hear the difference, and nobody's ever going to make it clear to him because we still tell the poor man we have only 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y, W. No. We do not pronounce letters. Letters do not have sounds. We only use these letters to represent the sounds of our language. Now, I want to add a term to our definition. So far, what we've noticed is, and what we've been talking about, is the fact that language is a system of vocal symbols. We've talked about symbols and the possibility of confusing the symbol for the thing it stands for. We've made the point that language is the noises we make with our face and not the scratches we make with our fist. That the whole business is symbolized. But now I'm going to add another term to our definition. I am going to say language is an arbitrary system of vocal symbols. Now, what do I mean by arbitrary? What I mean by arbitrary is this. There is no necessary connection in the world of reality between the thing symbolized and the symbol. There is no necessary connection in the world of reality between the thing symbolized and the symbol. In other words, what happens is that languages seem to select, so to speak. They seem to select certain aspects of the world of experience, and these are the things that they talk about, as though these particular things were important to these languages. For instance, in our own language, English, we select from the world of experience the whole idea of time. Time to us is of extreme importance. We can't make the simplest sentence without placing the particular event we're talking about along a timeline. What did I do? I dropped the chalk. I dropped the chalk. Now, you know perfectly well when that event took place, and I know perfectly well when it took place because I performed it. But if I asked you, as I did, what did I do? And you say you dropped the chalk, what are you saying? By putting that little on the end of that verb, what you are saying is the action has already taken place in the past, bud. But I know that because I performed it. You know it because you saw me perform it. I know, you know, I know it. I know, you know, I know, and so on. We could go all afternoon. And yet when I say, what did I do? You have to say, you drop, and the action has already taken place in the past, bud, the chalk. We can't get out of it. Now, is there anything really important in the world of existence about time that makes certain languages talk about it? No, there isn't. It's as though we were partners to a conspiracy, really. It's as though we were partners to a conspiracy to talk about the world in a certain way. Other languages would not talk about it this way at all. For instance, I remember an Asian graduate student. He was at Princeton when I was there in the graduate school years ago, and this kind of thing always used to amuse him. He said, it's really insulting to me. I don't see how you people don't get insulted, because after all, this is not the way the world is at all. This is not what you have to say. And I said, what do you say in your old language? And he said, what we say in our language is, in respect to chalk, a dropping. When you get right down to it, that's all that's really necessary. And the Chinese, I can remember a Chinese gentleman who said to me one time, he said, it's very strange that you always place these things in a time sequence. For instance, you say, the man is dead. He's stretched out lifeless before you. He's been dead for some time in the past, and he will be dead for a considerable period of time in the future, and yet you say, the man is dead. Well, I must say, I began thinking about it, and I said, what do you say? And he said, we say, man, dead. When you get right down to it, that's all that's necessary there. In other words, there is nothing really essential in the world of experience that makes us pick out time as though it were important. Each language selects in a perfectly arbitrary manner those things which it calls important. No, it is not necessary at all. For instance, Hopi, which is a language, an American Indian language, spoken in the southwest of the United States. It isn't a question of the time of an action that worries the Hopi. That's not what he considers important. All he's considered, or what he is considering much more important than the time in which an action took place, is whether or not the action really has happened. That is it a real thing that's been talked about, that's been observed by the observer? Has the person speaking to you really direct evidence that this thing is true? Or is it just something that might happen, that's potential? He's interested between potential and actual. We're interested in the time that an event took place. Here, for instance, you can see a Hopi talking to another Hopi about a person who is running. Now notice what we say. The observer, the speaker, is seeing the person running. And we say in English, he's running, or he is running. We have to, because the time is what we're concerned about. The Hopi, however, says wari, which means I know for a fact the running is taking place. It's a factual thing that's real. Now, notice, he's left the field of vision now, the runner. We have to say he ran. In other words, it's something that's happened in the past. Still worry to the Hopi because it was something this man knew for a fact took place. This is quite a different kind of thing. Quite a different kind of thing. We are all partners in a conspiracy, so to speak, without knowing we're in a conspiracy to divide the world in a certain way. Now, for instance, one of the things that we might look at in this connection in terms of being arbitrary is this. The speaker of German, for instance, can't talk about well, in other words, he won't talk about he's going somewhere. He has to tell you whether he's going on foot or whether he's going in a vehicle. He has two verbs, gehen, go on foot, and fahren, to go in a vehicle. For instance, when we say, tomorrow I'm going to Berlin, the German would say, morgen fahre ich nach Berlin. I'm going in some kind of vehicle. If he said, morgen gehe ich nach Berlin, tomorrow that would mean I'm walking to Berlin. Well, we'd get it. I think the German would get a picture like this, a man out on the Autobahn with his suitcase thumbing a ride. And yet we just simply say, tomorrow I'm going to Berlin. That's all we need to say. And if the guy wants to know how, he says, how are you going? Going to fly? Nope, going by train. Oh, no, going by car. In Navajo, another language, American Indian language, spoken in the southwest of the United States, when you want to talk about how you're going somewhere, you can't just simply say you're going either on foot or in a vehicle. You've got to say how in every case. You're going on foot, you're going on horseback at a trot, or at a gallop, you're going in a car, you're going to go in a boat, you're going to go in an airplane. He can't say the simplest verb of motion without being forced to specify the means of locomotion. In other words, each language is sort of hip, so to speak, on various aspects of experience that are terribly important. But it's perfectly arbitrary. Look at it this way. For instance, if I'd grown up and you'd grown up, we'd all grown up, and learned to call this thing foot and this thing hand, none of us would be the wiser. It's a perfectly arbitrary thing. This thing is still the same picker and stealer in the world of experience, whether I call it hand, or the Frenchman calls it la main, or the German calls it hand. But obviously, if you decided, yes, it's perfectly arbitrary, from now on I'm going to call this foot and this hand, well, if you did, the little man in the white coat would be around to get you very soon, because it's a very obligatory connection between language and the thing it refers to within any one language and any one culture. But there's no necessary connection in the world of reality. But you might say, no, I still don't believe it. There are certain words that must be this way. How about I'm not a poetic words, those words that are what they are because they sound like a real sound in the world of experience. These must be because those are what they really sound like. Well, I wonder if this is true. Now, don't look at what I'm going to do, but try to listen. You heard that sound. That's a splash. Obviously, it's a splash. It's a splash because that's what that sound is. It has to be a splash. It can't be anything else but a splash. Every language, then, if this were true, and that particular noise forced languages to hear the world of experience in an unarbitrary manner, but in a, if you will, logical manner, every language ought to have for that sound the word splash, but do they? To answer that question, we went to the UN, and we asked speakers of many different or several different languages to translate literally. It went splash, splash. It went splash, splash. And this is what we got.
In French, it would be flock, flock.
In Italian, it would be bluff, bluff.
In German, it would be plump, plump.
In Swedish, it would be plop, plop.
In Urdu, it is chapaka, chapaka.
And in Hungarian, it would be csobban, csobban.
And there you are. Obviously, it's not something that forces us to say certain things or use certain words. This is not the way it is. Because there is, again, no necessary connection in the world of experience between the thing symbolized and the symbol. There is no logical necessity. We are dealing with a very definitely arbitrary system. There isn't any logic in it, but people say, yes, there must be some logic somewhere. Some language or one language must be more logical than another language. But is this true? No. Because if there is any logic in language, it's the logic of the system itself, how the patterns hold together. Whether we think we're fooling ourselves or not, as saying that one language is more logical than another, and I've heard the French say, and I've heard many people say, French is the most logical language in the world. I once asked a Frenchman why he said that, and he says, is it not the langage of diplomatie? I left him with that one to think about it, and I'll leave that one for you to think about. No, there is no logic in language. Actually, what we call logic is simply the way our language structures experience. The actor, action, result, sentence type to us is the logical way to talk. The Chinese thinks the subject comment or topic comment, man dead, is the logical way to talk. We say, what is as logical as 2 + 2 = 4? What could be more logical than that? But this is only just a projection one level higher of the way our language actually structures experience. Actor, action, result. No. We talk about the world in a certain way, and that is what logic means to us. The Chinese talks about the world in a different way, and that is what logic means to him. The Chinese logician finds Immanuel Kant full of holes when it comes to logic. Logic is the way the system integrates. Now, on our program today, we have tried to talk about certain misconceptions. We have talked, for instance, about the fact that language is an arbitrary system of vocal symbols. It is not writing, that we don't pronounce letters. Letters don't have sounds. That this whole amazing business is, so to speak, selective. This is a very amazing kind of arbitrary way of really being able, for people being able to interact with each other. This business has to be learned early and thoroughly. Now, next week, what we're going to do is to answer another question, a very important question, as we continue our definition of language and continue to see if we can destroy some further misconceptions. And that question is, do primitive people have primitive languages? Do primitive people have primitive languages? Please be with us next week, won't you?
This is National Educational Television.